for all those people who can make contributions to help us go forward, because it is simply a volunteer effort, and we have to pay the piper also to have this presentation online where we can do a live streaming. And I do want to thank also Wisconsin Christian News for allowing us to live stream into their programming. We also have video links up in a number of different places where people, if they miss a presentation, they can go and see that. But I do want to thank the Citizen Sentinels for sponsoring this. And the Citizen Voice effort is, I want to just reiterate, it's an outcropping of the Citizen Sentinel Network, which is where our main website is, and you can go there to find video links. It's actually one of the only places you could find a description of each of the episodes there. Today, we're going to kind of take off on what we were talking about with Pastor Earl Wallace last week. If you remember, we did an interview, and Pastor Wallace did a very dramatic presentation while he was driving down the highway at 80 miles an hour in the middle of a rainstorm. So it kind of set the precedent for how we're going to do things in the future. I don't think he was driving 80 miles an hour. I'm sorry to provide that illusion. But what we were talking with Pastor Wallace about, because he's a person who studies the Bible very much, he's a practicing minister, but we were trying to get a better or more clear picture of the religious foundation from the perspective of what was going on in the minds of the people as they came across the Atlantic and settled in this area in what they were referring to as the New World, although it wasn't. And we've made the points about the Indian communities in which they were operating nearby. But one of the things that we didn't touch on with Pastor Wallace is basically he's very clear that whatever is inside somebody's mind is how you put out and practice your life. And the essence of what was going on in Jamestown cannot be divorced from the religious tradition or the foundations of what was actually preceding that. We know that when we talked about Columbus, the essence of what Columbus was doing was working on behalf of two sovereigns, essentially King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain. And for us in America, we don't really understand that clearly enough. We don't really, we don't wrap our heads around it properly enough. But they were Spanish monarchs, but they had also essentially by that time, they had pretty much gained control over the Catholic Church within Spain. And there was an intermingling of the church-state relations. So what does that mean? Well, when the people came from England to settle in Jamestown, there was already this foundation of church-state relations because the King of England at the time, who decided to create his own church, had been excommunicated from the Catholic Church. So it's a departure from the normal realm of the monarchs in Europe at that time. So we're looking at, old Europe today and getting an idea of what was really going on there as a foundation for what was happening when they crossed over the ocean. So after Columbus discovered this area, and he still swore up and down until the day he died that he had discovered, islands off the coast of India, and they got to China. But in 1502, they made a map, and you can pull that other map up, from Europe based on, the information that Columbus provided, and also a guy by the name of Amerigo Vespucci. And Columbus and Vespucci knew each other. Vespucci was a younger man, but they began to realize, hey, there's this continent there. Now, that meant that all these kings, all these monarchs who had the wherewithal to get involved in commissioning ships to go across the ocean did so. And the ones who couldn't, they couldn't afford it. They were distracted by other things. they weren't able to actually go across the ocean. So there were four main countries, Spain being the main one. Portugal was involved, but in South America. But in North America, in addition to Spain, there was the French, the the Dutch, and the English, and they all came across and they were exploring in this area. So the English are the ones that we're going to key in on here. And so what was happening? Well, the overall situation in England was pretty much a state of turmoil for a number of years. And one of the reasons that the state of turmoil existed was because of the Protestant Reformation. And many people think that King Henry VIII, he left the Catholic Church. He was actually excommunicated from the Catholic Church because he wanted a divorce from his wife at the time, Catherine Aragon. Now, where did Catherine of Aragon come from? Well, guess what? She was the daughter of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. And ultimately, these monarchs would make these political marriages. And in essence, they would secure their relationships with the other country based on these politically arranged marriages. So with King Henry, he wanted to get a divorce from Catherine, and Catherine basically didn't want a divorce. So there was a back and forth, and she wasn't going to give up her title as the Queen of England easily. But it also involves Spain, which is a Catholic country. So here you have a situation, and the Pope refused to allow Henry to divorce Catherine. He refused to allow an annulment of the marriage. And so ultimately, King Henry VIII, and I think I'm not sure where we're at right now, but I want you to throw up King Henry VIII's picture, which is down on the bottom. And I kind of, I crossed you up. Sorry, Jared. But King Henry VIII basically was in a situation where he really needed an heir to the throne. He wanted to have this situation taken care of, but the wife he had was not providing him an heir. He thought his marriage was essentially cursed by God, and so he was asking the Pope to intervene. The Pope wouldn't do it, and ultimately it ended up with the Pope excommunicating Henry, kicking him out of the church. So King Henry got the brilliant idea that since he was the King of England, he could do whatever he wanted to do. And so he not only got his wishes and married another individual, but he also created his own church at the time. This is what is known now as the Church of England. The essence of the Church of England is, also the Anglican Church. So Jared, I'm sorry, but I'm going to make you now go back to number 3 on our list, which was the colonial settlement issue. You did a very good job on that, actually, jumping around, and it's my fault. I crossed you up. But the colonial settlement in the New World, as you can look at this, and you might, if you can zoom in on that would show the red area. Is the area of the early settlement of the British. And ultimately, it started into the area which we have been studying, which is James Fort, and then merging into Jamestown. So these people came across the ocean. They created these colonial structures. The king at that point in time was James I, and that's why we have the name Jamestown. But the whole area was named after the queen, and they didn't name it after her name, but they named it after the Virgin Queen, Virginia. So what do these people believe in? Well, the essence is that it had the appearance of being a Protestant church, but it wasn't. It was a church that was created by King Henry VIII. And it, one of the things that Earl Wallace and I were talking about last week, Pastor Wallace is explaining that, the church was essentially just a kind of a carbon copy of the Catholic Church, because that's basically all they knew. King Henry kind of took whatever he could and basically transformed the Catholic Church into the Church of England. Now, if you think about that and you go back in time and you think about this situation, you're a Catholic and all of a sudden you're not, simply because of the decree of the king. It might have problems along the way for your life of faith. And so when these people came across the ocean, the worshiping was fragmented in some ways. You have people still holding on to the old Catholic understandings and trying to merge it with the new Church of England. Now, this happened. King Henry was basically in a situation where in the middle of the 1500s. So when we look at this, inside of the Church of England here, which essentially is the church that they constructed at Jamestown, it's very plain. And so it doesn't have a lot of trappings of like the Catholic ornate statuary and things like that. So there was some degree of an attempt on the part of the people who came across the ocean to try and go in a more Protestant direction. However, the overall situation here in this period of time was that it was still the belief system. So what was inside of their minds was still more oriented around the Catholic understanding. So when we were talking about Columbus, one of the things that I was explaining is that the same monarchs, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, who sent Columbus across the ocean, they created the Catholic Inquisition in Spain, which is now, it's essentially known as the Spanish Inquisition. But the purpose of that was based off of a papal inquisition, other inquisitions that were going on. So what does this mean? Well, it essentially meant that they were examining the belief of the individuals who claimed to be Catholics at the time. So in this period, there is a history leading up to this situation. And one of these things occurred in jolly old England. So if we go and zero in on the portrait of John Wycliffe, John Wycliffe actually lived at a time well before King Henry VIII. The situation is that he lived in the 1300s, and Wycliffe was he was a guy who was a Catholic priest. At one point in time, he began to question the realities of what was going on with the papacy. There was a pope by the name of John the 23rd who introduced these things called indulgences, in which you could buy your way into heaven. And the priests who were very concerned about piety and truth, and they knew the scriptures according to their Latin understanding of the scriptures. They understood these things as people who were close to understanding the truth. And so some of them could no longer live with their conscience, knowing that what the papacy was doing at this point in time was not according or in alignment with the Bible. And so some of them would speak out, and John Wycliffe was one of these guys. He was very outspoken, and he had a noble who was he was supporting him to the degree that, I guess he had his own interests, but his name was John of Gaunt. And the thing that Wycliffe, one of the interesting things that Wycliffe was proposing was that the Catholic Church had sinned and they needed to actually repent, and they should sell all their property or give away all their property. And the priesthood then should become, just living off of, the means that they had, and not this elaborate, ornate type of church hierarchy that they had, and the wealth that went along with that. Now, I don't know if you uh, are coming from a Catholic background or what your religious foundation is, but you can imagine how well that might have went over with the Pope at the time. So the Pope shifted from the time of Alexander the 23rd, and there were different popes involved. But this particular pope, who was on the throne at the time of Wycliffe's protest, basically, I believe his name was Pope Innocent III. He had a real serious problem, and there were a number of inquiries. Wycliffe was called into London, where the Bishop of London, basically was querying him. It was kind of an informal investigation, but ultimately, what happened is they excommunicated Wycliffe at some point in time. He was persona non grata among the Catholic Church. But what happened at that point in time, even now, the interesting thing is that Wycliffe, he studied the Bible very seriously. There's a picture here of Wycliffe in his study. He was a very sincere, genuine man who happened to be a priest. He was a priest for a reason, but he was really seriously having trouble with his conscience. And now, ultimately, what happened is that Wycliffe died. The church, the Catholic Church, basically said that he's no longer a Catholic because of his writings. They burned his books. They even went as far as digging up his body, and then burning his bones, and then scattering the ashes in a nearby river. So this is it's a powerful reality here. You're actually making sure that nothing of this man survives. So a man in Bohemia, who was also a priest, picked up on these writings, these ideas of John Wycliffe. His name was Jan Hus. So Jan Hus, he was born in what today is the Czech Republic. Jan Hus studied what Wycliffe was doing, and also a very conscientious priest. And he could not survive, just going forward and hiding this stuff that he was seeing with his own eyes. And in this time frame, there were these contradictions between the papacy at this point. At one point, the papacy was taken control of by the French king. Essentially, it's known in history as the Avignon. They had it, the Avignon papacy, where they had it moved from Rome over to Avignon, France, and it was under pretty much the control of the French kings in this period of time, and that's debatable according to the Catholic popes as well. But that lasted, I think, around up until 1377 was the time in which the papacy was moved back to Rome. But these different challenges between the different popes, they affected the people. Most of the people maybe weren't paying attention very much, but the people who had a deep conscientious concern, these were people like Wycliffe and Jan Hus. Now, Hus was called into what they call the council because he was basically saying some of the same things that Wycliffe was saying, and he was calling into question the capability of the papacy. So this Council of Constance, there's a couple of different paintings of this. Both of the two priests were put on trial by the Catholic Church. Now, Wycliffe, he died a normal death, but he was smeared. His reputation was smeared by the Catholic Church, and ultimately, you understand what happened to his bones. The Bohemians actually decided not to go to all that trouble, and what they decided to do is they condemned Jan Hus. Now he was actually put in prison for quite a long time, and he was in prison for a good number of years. But people that came and visited him, basically, they got a clear idea that he was a pretty sincere man, and the other ones who visited him who didn't like what he was talking about just felt that he was a heretic and he should be burned. In fact, one of his closest friends condemned him to be burned at the stake. He advocated that he be burned. So Jan Hus was condemned, and instead of buried and dug up again, they just burned him at the stake. This is a depiction, a painting that was put together depicting that moment. So they burned him at the stake. Hus was a very conscientious man. It is said that they heard him as he's burning in the flames, singing Christian hymns out loud. And the Czech people really revere Jan Hus for standing up as a rebel. There's a phrase which I can't remember right now, but it's centered around seeking the truth, trying to protect the truth, and being willing to die for the truth. That's pretty much a paraphrase of that. But it's a common phrase that they would understand in the Czech Republic today, because he was a hero who stood up to the people who did not believe in truth. So you have this situation. All of these things, are happening in Europe in this period of time, and these are things that are going on in the 1300s. Hus was burned at the stake on, I believe, July 6th in 1415. So these things are all happening at the same time, not simultaneously, so to speak, but there's a number of different I guess you would call them tremors, like earthquake tremors that are going through Europe at this point. So, when did the Spanish Inquisition happen? In 1470. And because they were trying, there had been some popes who were trying to make sure that this kind of heresy wouldn't exist in the people, right? And especially in the priests. So, the overall situation is that this is laying the foundation then for Columbus to come across the ocean, and Columbus dare not question the Catholic monarchs, right? Otherwise, he's not going to get his ships and he's not going to get his commission. But even then, we understand how Columbus actually had to deal as a pawn with a king. So enter Martin Luther. Martin Luther is a German. He's also a priest. He's basically seeing these things going on, and he takes issue with the Catholic Church. In fact, he puts together 95 theses that are basically the points that he has that are not in alignment with the Bible. Luther did a very serious translation of the Bible into German. But before that, in 1517, so you're talking, you're looking at 112 years from 1415 to 1517, where Huss came and where Luther enters the picture. So these things simmered for a period of time. But Luther is in the same vein. The Catholic Church was able to put things down and calm things for a period of time. And you have the exploration of the New World going on at this point. But Luther is a man of conscience. And so he puts these 95 theses, he nails them to the church in Wittenberg, which is kind of the custom at the time. If you had a beef with anybody, you would go nail something on a wall somewhere, or put it in the public square. So Luther put these things together. And ultimately, there's this a woodcut where it's talking about Luther and Huss giving communion together. So they're linking these two protesters of the Catholic Church. This woodcut shows that kind of situation. And the ultimate is that they're linking these men together. And this is the foundation then for what we see going on in England at this point in time. We see and eventually King Henry VIII coming into the picture. He is not a person who protested the church. He basically was someone who was happy. This is what Pastor Wallace was trying to say. on last Monday's program. He was happy with the church. He didn't like the way the church wouldn't let him divorce his wife. So he creates his own church. This is not a spiritual foundation for a church to exist. It's an imposition of a king, and they tried as best they could to carry over the trappings of what the Catholic Church was all about. But you can see that it didn't solve the issues. And this is really what is going on. When these people are coming across the ocean and settling in Jamestown, they are not Protestants in any real sense of the word. They're members of the Anglican Church, which at best can be said it's a splintered church. It's not really clear what they're believing in. They're trying to go back to the Catholic belief system, but you have this Protestant Reformation going on in Europe at this time, and guess what? That created 30 years war. It created a war between the Catholics and the Protestants, and King Henry's errors created the problem of the English Civil War, where you have the division of England between the Catholic, which is what Pastor Wallace was talking about, Queen Mary of Scotland and Elizabeth, who was very much a Protestant. Problem was that Elizabeth was not necessarily a direct lineage heir. She was the daughter of the one that Henry divorced. So you have Mary, who is more having the claim, but she was a Catholic. So this is very convoluted and very confusing for these people. And so sometimes the best way to deal with things is to not deal with them at all, or to deal with them in a minimum manner. There was very splintered kind of authority as they came into Jamestown and settled in Jamestown. And Jamestown was not a religious endeavor, although there's stories of, somebody on the shores of the river, claiming this land for God, and, that they would be able to go forward. Well, that was an individual, most likely, who had a sense of a relationship with God, and he was, trying to do this on behalf of God. But the Jamestown effort was primarily an effort in what we could call capitalism today. It was a venture capitalist effort. So it was a get rich quick scheme. That's what was the driving force of the Jamestown colony. So next week, we will have another interview. We're going to do this back and forth teaching and then having an interview. So from this point in time, you'll be able to see more clearly how these things relate to what's going on in our society today. I want to thank you for coming on board, taking 30 minutes of your time today. I want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank Jared, who is actually filling in for Spencer today, who's on vacation. Yeah, how dare he take a vacation in this very serious moment in time? Anyway, I want to thank you guys for producing this, putting it together, making it happen. Thank you much.